What is up, yo? Welcome to episode 7 of Into the Necrosphere. My guest on today's show is going to be Sam Loynes of Akercocke, the Antichrist Imperium Voices and Shrines. And if you are a individual with discerning musical taste, if you have watched or followed this podcast for any length of time, or if you're a regular of the UK metal scene, then his name and the name of those bands should not be unfamiliar to you. So had an absolute blast talking to him. So passionate about what he does. I am sure you're going to really enjoy the chat as well. But that is coming up in just a few minutes. Before I get to that, just a reminder that if you are watching this on YouTube and you enjoy what I do, please hit the subscribe button, leave a like, comment on the video, and share with everybody that you know. And if for some inexplicable reason you are joining the growing throngs of subscribers on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, etc., who do not want to see my face for an hour and a half, but prefer to listen to the show, just remember that it is available on basically every decent podcast platform around. So you can subscribe and make sure that every Tuesday there is a fresh new episode of Into the Necrosphere waiting for you on your phone or whatever device you listen to podcasts on. So, and also just to say again, thank you so much if you are checking out the show. I know that there are a shitload of metal podcasts around. A lot of them are really good. I hope that you're getting something out of this show that you wouldn't necessarily get out of those. And as I've said before on interviews and on episodes gone by, I'm really kind of doing this for fun more than anything else. To talk to people that I find interesting, and just to kind of do a show that I would enjoy watching if one were not around. And speaking of interesting people, I have an absolutely fucking awesome lineup coming up in the next couple of weeks. I will talk about that towards the end of the show. Also at the end of the show, another installment of the illustrious What I Am Cranking this week. And I'm going to be talking about the new Gatecreeper album, as well as 2 albums that came out earlier in the year that you definitely need to take note of. The new record by Panzerfaust, as well as a release by Tronos. And if that name doesn't ring a bell, you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself. Now, I'll talk about that more in just a bit. But first up, coming up right after the musical interlude, this is Sam Loynes. Sam Loynes, welcome to Into the Necrosphere, and I am not going to lie, you've been on my wish list of people to talk to for a variety of reasons, but in part it's because you've kind of over the last couple of years very quietly become one of the more prolific figures, I would say, in the UK scene, or certainly the UK scene that I'm most interested in. So without wanting to, forget any of the many bands that you're involved in, I think it might be good to just get you to introduce yourself properly and just say, exactly who you play in, because I may have lost track of someone down the line.
I think I've almost lost track, but as it currently stands, I'm playing in Akercocke, playing keyboards and doing some occasional backing singing, voices as the guitarist, and again, backing singing. I'm also in a band called Shrines, where I suppose I'm the front man, and then Antichrist Imperium, which is a studio project, and I sing in that. Then there's been some other bands throughout the years, but they're all kind of either defunct or out there in the stratosphere, but alongside the kind of heavy metal stuff, I've also been interested in creating music for films and various unreleased solo projects, which hopefully will see the light of day before too long. So, I mean, that's pretty much everything, I think, unless you can think of one that I've missed.
Well, I will name one thing, and it's probably related to the solo projects. I know I messaged you about this on Instagram when you posted it up, but that cover, or that 1 minute that you posted of you doing Crazy on the piano one Saturday morning.
Oh, you mean
when is that going to see the light of day?
You mean the seal?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, I think that's a great song, and I actually love playing covers.
Yeah.
And often when I go kind of in and out of creating my own stuff, it takes learning a cover for me to kind of get back in the swing of things.
Yeah.
In terms of like actually doing it, that's a good idea. I'd love to have a cover or two on a record, which is something that I've never done. And what better one would be, than Seal? I mean, Christ, that's a great song. Thank you for the kind words about it.
Yeah, no, mate, I absolutely love it. And really, I mean, I think firstly, I think it suits your voice and your style massively. I mean, you sort of made it your own on that clip. For anybody who's seen it, I think they'll all agree. But it just suited you so well. But it also suits potentially voices.
Yeah. I think and the same with Antichrist Imperium. The singing style I've approached is something that's atypical, within heavy metal. I mean, there's kind of like boring reasons why that is, and there's also interesting reasons, I suppose. The most boring reason is just that I can't really sing or do the guttural stuff or shout and scream as people do in metal. I just can't do it. It just in Shrines, I kind of have a bit of a Jazz Coleman thing, which is like, I suppose, a bit kind of harsher, which I can do, but it causes me a lot of problems. So I think, technique-wise, I just can't do it. But then, really my favourite singers, are more, like people like Scott Walker and, Nick Cave, and to get that kind of style of singing matching with, or should we say, like a synergy with heavy metal, then that is, I suppose, something that's relatively idiosyncratic to some of the stuff that I've put out. Having said that, one of my biggest influences, Jason from Akercocke, which is a strange thing to say considering obviously he's just one of my best friends now, but he had that approach to vocal in the sense that people would listen to it and go, can he do this in a death metal band or black metal thing, that's how it sort of comes about. It's a natural approach, and luckily it's different.
I mean, I was wondering about your involvement with Akercocke and how that got started, because I know Jason as well, and obviously I think we can both say, without insulting him or insulting David, that they're somewhat more senior to you. So how did that relationship get started, and how did you get brought into the band?
Well, it's a nice one, and I always liked going down this story, to be honest with you. I was just a fan of the band. I remember going into HMV back when you can kind of like pull a CD off the shelf and put it into a CD player and check it out with some headphones in the corner of the room or whatever. And I remember seeing Akercocke Goat of Mendy's record just as I was getting into just as I was getting into metal, really. And I remember the first sort of, it's Of Menstrual Blood and Semen, the first song, which is a song for all the family. And it just starts with this cacophony and just a blast, and it was literally like, I just got the headphones and it's like, it's too much, But then I was somehow, weeks went by, whatever, somehow I was like, I need to go back to that. And I don't know why. I can see that you've got like The Exorcist behind you and The Shining, it's like, I don't know why I'm so obsessed with a film like The Exorcist. It's just a sort of, I suppose, morbid curiosity.
Yeah.
And I think Akercocke had that for me. So after I got over that hump, and got used to the extremity of it, I suppose, to a degree, or desensitized, I should say. I started to really become a fan of the band, seeing them live as much as I could. And yeah, so slowly got to see them and know them a bit at shows, you know. I like to kind of get in there and go say hello to people if I can, you know, after having a couple of gins. And yeah, you know, the next thing I knew is, you know, me and David had started kind of having a conversation, and he invited me for some drum lessons. And you know, went down to the studio, which at the time was a real honor for me to do, and learned some, well, to be honest with you, we only sort of sat in the studio for about half an hour playing trying to play some thrash beats. And the rest of the time we just went down the pub, had a couple of pints of Guinness, and basically became friends that way, and obviously slowly got to know the rest of the band. And the same actually can be applied to Matt Wilcock. He took me for some guitar lessons, you know. Again, a massive kind of privilege at the time. And then, yeah, became friends. And give it a year later or something, I remember getting the phone call from Jason. And it was a, you know, phone message, you know, answer phone message. And he says something along the lines of, "Can you call me back? I've got an interesting proposition for you." You know, this kind of.
Yeah, he always sounds really earnest when he speaks. No matter what he says, like super seriously earnest.
You're absolutely right, and that's an astute observation. And you know, hearing this kind of like message at the time, again, I was like, I think I know what this is going to be, and. Yeah, and to be and you know, not to forget that, you know, Peter Benjamin, who at the time was in Akercocke, and now is the frontman of Voices, that he was another collaborator, and he sung on the first, or what was diminished fifth, but we're now called Shrines. And I think Pete put my name in the pot there for keyboardist with Akercocke, along with David, and you know, so I've got to sort of. So thanks to Pete for that as well, you know. So that, you know, got that phone call, and of course, you know, I said, "Go on then, let's have it." And yeah, that was in, I think, 2009. I might be totally wrong about that, but it feels like at least 10 years I've been in the band.
Yeah,
even with the break.
yeah. It's interesting what you say about their music too, because I mean, I've, you know, said this quite a few times on the show. Anybody who knows me knows us too, by a country mile, my favorite band. But the way that I got into their music is quite similar to you. I heard, I think about 6 months before Corazon came out, they put Son of Morning onto a Kerrang compilation.
Oh yeah, nice.
And I heard it, and it was like, part of me liked it, part of me was like, you know, this is just so different to anything that I was listening to at the time. But it's exactly like that sort of morbid curiosity that you mentioned. I just kept going back to it and back to it and back to it. And it's like, the more you listen to it, the more it's like, it's just making more and more sense now. And weirdly enough, I think actually The Exorcist is a very good comparator to that from a you know, movie perspective, because for me at least, that movie was the same. The first time I watched it, I actually didn't enjoy it very much. But I just kept on going back to it. And I've probably seen The Exorcist 50 times plus now. And I think, and now when I watch it, I kind of get the same kick from it that I did, you know, when everything sort of made sense and everything started clicking. And it's the same with Akercocke.
I'm just wondering if that, you know, that amount, you know, that view count, you know, which I can definitely say that I'm in a similar bracket. Does that make us sick people?
Well,
maybe.
I mean,
I suppose it depends on whose side you're on.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, you know, if you start crying when the girl is well again at the end of the movie, then you need to watch out. But
I was just at Brutal Assault, right? We did it last year, but I just went for the kit this year. Some friends of mine were playing, so very luckily got invited to come and join them. And I got there, you know, in Prague, and it was, you know, I had to get to this outer Prague town in Czech called Jaromír or Josef, I can't remember. Anyway, the only thing that I needed to get there for in that first evening was they were showing The Exorcist in like this cinema that they have in this festival. It's in like a negative barn thing on the kind of outer perimeter of the festival. Like proper set up with like all these old school cinema seats, like wooden chairs. And got there just as like everything started getting, it's like about half an hour into the film, 20 minutes or whatever. And I just, I got a couple of Czech beers. I just sat there and I was like, this is it. I mean, I was just like on my feet, just like, when it was all kicking off. So that was one of the recent viewings. That was one of the best ones. And what was even cooler is that it was the director's cut version, rather than the theatrical one. So there was all those kind of little extra bits which are, some of which are just horrific, like when she goes down the stairs.
Backwards, I'll tell you a fucking funny story about the spider walk. So back when that director's cut was first released, I used to work at a cinema back in South Africa, and as has been revealed on the Malevolent Creation episode, where I grew up, it's basically like the as I described it, the Bible Belt in America, if the people who live in the Bible Belt weren't such fucking sinners.
Right, okay,
folks are a little uptight there, but anyway, I had to go shut some people up during on the first day the movie was showing, actually, and I went in and I shut them up, and I knew there was going to be I knew the spider walk scene was going to be next, so I kind of hung back. I just wanted to see it again. And literally the second the spider walk scene begins, this woman in the front row started screaming, and when I say screaming, I'm like, "Ah!" Like cartoon screaming, jumped up out of her chair, put her hands in her hair, and carried on screaming, running all the way out of the cinema. And I kind of peeked out by the exit, and she had literally gone across the foyer and was just darting to fucking God knows where, just
hit that insanity.
Bastard. Yeah.
Well, you can't blame her though, And I think like I always think with The Exorcist in particular, and I've got tales of when my parents saw it, but imagine seeing that in the 70s. Man.
Oh fuck yes, yeah.
There's obviously there were some incredible horror movies that preceded it, but in terms of this visceral darkness and the kind of representation of evil, there wasn't anything kind of hammy about it, really. I mean, at least I don't feel that way. It's genuinely disturbing, and God knows what you must have thought, because it still looks so real now.
I completely agree.
In the 70s, like having you could see the strings dangling off the bats that were flying off in whatever, or the birds in Hitchcock's The Birds. You could see the sort of the mechanisms that they've been using that were very archaic at the time, but still some very, very scary films. But in terms of the use of special effects and the sonic element, the actual audio, and so on and so forth, The Exorcist, I mean, it's in a league of its own.
Yeah.
So
the thing, it still is though, because I mean, I'm sure you're as big of a fan of horror movies as I am, but I always say whenever I get to talking to anybody about this, when it comes to horror, there has not been anything released prior to or after, and I almost doubt there ever will be, that can get the same sort of reaction from an audience that The Exorcist can to this day. I mean, and weirdly, when after I'd had my daughter, one of the I went through a period where I didn't watch the movie for about 2 or 3 years. She was about a year old when I watched it the first time after she'd been born, and your response to it my response to it was so different.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I literally like, Jesus, this is fucking seriously disturbing.
So in what way was it so different then?
I think you could. I could probably relate more to how Ellen Burstyn feels in the movie.
Oh yeah, sure.
In that
you sort of forget in a way how much of an impact that character has on the whole film.
Yeah. And she is so good in that movie. Just absolutely phenomenal. Yeah. I mean, everything is phenomenal, and One of the things I love most about the director's cut, there's a conversation between Merrin and Damien on the stairs that really kind of ties the whole movie together. And I'm very surprised that William Friedkin ever cut that out. But the way that Merrin kind of explains to him why it's happening, and
Yeah, I know that. I
helps
know
Karras
exactly the scene
understand.
you're talking about.
I mean, it's incredibly touching. Again, like I said, I don't know why Friedkin took that out of the movie, but
yeah,
just takes the entire thing to another level, in my opinion.
so that's in the director's cut, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Because I remember that scene at Brutal Assault recently. It's actually quite a slow burner, isn't it?
Yeah.
After all that madness has just happened.
Yeah.
No, you're right. It's. I don't think I could often say this, but I genuinely think that the director's cut is significantly better. I think The Wicker Man as well is another one that has a director's cut that is. It's just got certain scenes in it that elevate it to a slightly more, I think basically like controversial area. And obviously, I think probably with The Wicker Man, I mean, don't quote me on this, but like some of the scenes that get cut out maybe were just a little bit too controversial at the time. I think that there's a scene in the bar where they do this amazing song called "Gently Johnny." I don't think that's in the original.
No,
and it's one of the most incredible sort of montage scenes, and it further freaks you out about that small insular pub community, and that wasn't in the first version, or the theatrical version. Along with I think there's an orgy that goes on the front lawn outside the pub. I don't know whether that's in there, but how could you take that out?
Yeah, I was about to say, but I mean, most of those movies had at least. I mean, I know with the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, when it was released here in the UK, there was a fair bit cut out of it. I know with The Shining, there was some cut out of it. Although there's a misconception that a lot was taken from it, because there's two versions. The one that Kubrick thought was boring, and he slashed about half an hour out of the movie. Yeah. And then I think the original theatrical release only has about 3 minutes taken out of the slashed version. I mean, the slashed version doesn't really have a lot extra going for it, aside from some extended conversation at the bar.
Oh, right. I see. That's I'm a bit of a Kubrick nerd. I did know of the one you refer to that's got just a few extra minutes, but I'm not. So you say there's another one which has about half an hour cut from it?
Yeah, so I actually have that version. Yeah, it's the US Blu-ray. So it's 146 minutes long, and it has I'd say predominantly the stuff that's extra. There's a couple of scenes with Danny and his mom. There's a few more scenes with just kind of general stuff with Jack and the lady falling out. I don't know why her name slipped my mind, again, considering how many times I've seen that movie. But then specifically, there's a lot more stuff with Jack and sitting at the bar, talking to the barman, kind of,
I might have seen it.
Bearing his soul.
I might have seen it. Yeah. I mean, Jack Nicholson is he's the man,
Yeah.
He's
and
my favorite.
And I would definitely say, I know that on Joe Rogan, Rob Zombie recently said that no movie is too sacred for a remake. I would definitely say, with as far as The Shining and The Exorcist is concerned, and There Will Be Blood as well, which I want to come on to in a second.
Yeah.
I don't want to see any remake. I mean, the Exorcist TV series was fucking dreadful. The Shining miniseries that Stephen King made was a pile of shit. I mean, as far as There Will Be Blood is concerned, that's total sacrilege. I never want to see a remake of that in my entire life. I know you're as big of a fan of that movie as I am, by the way.
Well, I mean, if you do put a gun against my head, that is my favorite film.
Same, yeah. I mean, it's not, and it's when I talk about it, it's not just my favorite movie. It's my favorite movie by a stretch that makes almost everything else insignificant. That's another thing that I've seen tens, possibly close to 100 times, and I think part of why I love it is I really appreciate performance. And so that's why I love going to, see live bands. That's why I love going to see comedy. That's why I love watching movies. But the performance in There Will Be Blood to me is on a level that I it goes beyond words, because there's so much subtlety to. I mean, there's so much kind of noise and so much harshness to it, but the subtleties behind it, like the looks that they shoot each other, that Daniel Day-Lewis and Paul Dano shoot each other, and the sort of the undercurrent of kind of brooding resentment and hate that those two people have for each other throughout that movie is fucking phenomenal. And then the what just kind of ties it all together, that Johnny Greenwood score.
Of course, yeah.
Which is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, some of the Arvo Part, use of soundtrack as well, who's a big influence on my practice. But I think Johnny Greenwood, what he's doing in terms of his soundtrack work is by far my favourite contemporary composer working within film. His best is definitely There Will Be Blood, and that's just because it's a part of the whole package of my favourite film of all time, and that's not something that I say lightly. I've given that some thought.
Yeah, me too.
But his music in You Were Never Really Here, or the one with Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah.
Or I think it's You Were Never Really Here. Again, like this kind of, he was using in that particular film, it's like a synergy between diegetic and non-diegetic, where you don't really know where the soundtrack begins or the sound, the actual sound design starts, and There Will Be Blood, the use of soundtrack just hits home of one of the most profound performances and, affecting narratives that has ever been put onto film. It's a tall order, because it's easy to just put any music over something, and it to evoke some sort of emotional response, and I know that as someone who, is currently studying within this area and a practitioner within this area. But to do what he did in this kind of experimental, highly dynamic way, like super risk-taking, and it to just hit home. He's like with Daniel Day-Lewis, he's got some other, without getting kind of metaphysical about it, he's got some other messages coming into his brain and ability that is completely and utterly, next level. And there's plenty of amazing actors, and there's plenty of amazing composers, but then there's this little bracket which is just outside the box and in their own thing, and no one can compare.
Yeah, agree. And again, that score mirrors the Daniel Day-Lewis performance, in the sense that it's equally striking whether it's being subtle. So when the I think the song is called "The Prospectors Arrive," where they do kind of the main theme that goes through the movie, where he just does that on the piano. No, it's I'm trying to think. Right in the movie where he's giving his monologue, and he says how they're going to have bread and the kids are going to have schools and stuff. That piano piece that plays, and then later on they do that as the Prospectors Quintet with strings and things like that. But again, he can make that exact piece of music really loud and grandiose, or he can make it very, very subtle, and it hits the same kind of emotional notes every single time. It's just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
There's an interesting one. I'll try. I'm going to be paraphrasing it and trying to remember what he said. But Tarantino said something great about the sort of, what can kind of sum up the Daniel Plainview character, which is within the first act of the film, where he falls down the well, right, and breaks his leg, I think it is. And I think you see him like clambering along, in the middle of nowhere, and then there's just a cut between there and when he's like back home or something. And the point that Tarantino was making is that the journey between him falling in that well and then having to literally pull himself to his house miles away, it's a subtle thing that Paul Thomas Anderson's obviously decided to do, but it's like that kind of huge cut that represent so much. It's like this guy is just driven to succeed without any compromise, and he will save his own arse, if you like, no matter what. Inhuman, basically that act is inhuman that he did, because most people just die out in the middle of nowhere with a broken leg, right? But he actually somehow managed to get his way back to wherever he was, And I thought that was an interesting observation by Tarantino that I didn't pick up on.
Yeah, I agree. It's something I picked up on later, but there's once you've picked up on it, you can see how obviously it's signposted, because Paul Thomas Anderson at the those opening scenes in the movie, those opening cuts, he really places emphasis on how far in the middle of nowhere Daniel Plainview actually is. There's these kind of swooping cuts of the landscape, and there is absolutely fuck all going on for miles on end. So that if he has to crawl out there, he has crawled his way to basically save his life. But one of my absolute favorite scenes in the movie, because I think it's kind of so sharp, but it's also really, really subtle at the same time. Right at the end of the baptism, you see Eli stand in the pulpit, and Plainview turns to him, and he shakes his hand, and he kind of pulls him in really close. And then if you look closely, because it's never emphasized, but if you look closely, you can see Paul Dano like pulling his face back, almost in shock. And then right at the end of the movie, when they're having the altercation in the bowling alley, Daniel Plainview shouts at him and says, "I told you I was going to eat you." And it's like, I always said, it's like, it just clicked. Again, probably viewing 15, it's like, shit, that's probably where he says it to him.
Yeah. And I think that there's many examples of Daniel Day-Lewis doing things like that, which aren't scripted, to completely throw Paul Dano off. And respect to Paul Dano as a young actor, having that kind of powerhouse in front of him, doing unpredictable things, and him to actually like be able to match it, or should we say respond in the right way. I mean, like when he's, I'm going to bury you underground, Eli.
I was just about to say, one of my favorite scenes of the movie as well, that when he says, something about, "I thought you were a healer and a vessel for the Holy Spirit." He just absolutely.
I think like that whole bit when he's like basically pushing his head into the floor and slapping him about, like in this kind of really just heavy-handed, kind of almost, just horrible way, basically. I think a lot of that was off the cuff. So I mean, like, Paul Thomas Anderson almost certainly would have said something along the lines of, "You need to get really rough with him and overpower him," and so on and so forth. But in terms of how that manifested, I think Daniel Day-Lewis was just literally like, he probably wouldn't have far off like actually killed him.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. Well, on the set of Gangs of New York, I read an interview with Leonardo DiCaprio once, and he was saying how unbelievably difficult it is to work with Daniel Day-Lewis, because he's so intense. He said there would be moments where he would be sat kind of, draped in the American flag and he's Buffalo Bill, Bill the Butcher outfit. And he would just sit glaring at him. And he says that, they're doing this over lunch and stuff. He says it freaks you out. And I mean, it's not like Leonardo DiCaprio is a withering flower by any stretch of the imagination. And by the way, just side note, because you mentioned Tarantino, did you watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
I did, yeah.
How fucking amazing is that movie?
I really enjoyed it, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was absolutely magnificent.
And to me, like the way I just put it out there is like, it's just cool people, characters being cool.
Yeah.
And I was in the perfect mood for it when I went to see it. And I'm a bit of a kind of, I don't like it when cinemas are noisy. It really bothers me. And it was actually a really quiet audience. And yeah, I mean, I just thought that, it totally just transported me to that time and place, I loved every minute of it. I think, arguably narratively and whatnot, it's not got the most going on, but I don't mind that. I actually enjoy those films as long as the performances, the script, the kind of, stylized kind of depiction of it is all there. I'm totally into those films. I mean, one that springs to mind would be Drive. That's another one.
Yeah, superb.
So I loved it. Yeah, it's probably my favourite of his since Jackie Brown.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed the Hateful Eight, which I know I'm in the minority
Cool.
on, but I thought it was excellent. I mean, I don't actually think there's been a Tarantino movie that I didn't like, but I
enjoy all of
really
them,
really
really,
enjoyed this.
but
I personally think it's DiCaprio's best performance ever. I
he's
mean,
awesome in it. Oh
he
my
is
God.
fucking phenomenal. I mean,
Yeah.
that scene where he's acting as a character on the show,
Yeah.
he's the bad guy, and you know the little girl tells him that's the best acting I've ever seen. I mean, she's fucking 100% right. That's the best thing he's ever done.
Yeah. And that little girl's amazing as well. Like
Yes.
she
Yeah.
like this kind of like charisma that she has, you know. So again, you know, a credit to the amazing casting by Tarantino and his team or whatever, you know. So I loved that film. Absolutely loved it. Yeah.
Just getting back to music, I mean, you are a multi-instrumentalist, and obviously hearing you play the piano and knowing obviously that you're now looking into film soundtracks, stuff like that. Are you trained in any instruments? What's kind of been your musical your musical road or your musical background?
I originally started to play the drums when I was a young kid. I had some hearing difficulties, and you know, I had to wear hearing aids and all that stuff when I was growing up. And I remember the drums was just something that I could really hear with ultimate clarity, you know. So I was drawn to them, and you know, got my first drum kit when I was kind of, you know, I don't know, I think like 10 or something like that. I might be totally wrong, but it's around about that. And yeah, ever since then, just, you know, gone hands-on into instruments. Like I've never ever done anything by the book. There's been no classical training. I had some drum lessons, very much sort of just being shown patterns and just imitating them. And that's exactly the same as what happened with the piano. I had an amazing, lucky enough to have an amazing music teacher when I was at sort of first schooling or whatever. And again, he would show me patterns of classical music sections of, you know, Rachmaninoff and Mozart and so on, and I just mirror what he would play, you know, and that's how I always learned, you know. Guitar came a bit later, and you know, there's been zero classical training. I can't read one bit of music. It's all by ear. So you know, I'm. It's funny because I'm envious of those people who can do amazing sight reading and taught in that traditional way, like my piano teacher was incredibly so. But then on the flip of it, at least he certainly was kind of very interested and, should you say, didn't quite understand how I could imitate quite complex bits of music on the piano without like having the reference of the music there. So I think, you know, his side of things far more, you know, without downplaying my own abilities too much, like, you know, his side of things is a different level of musicality. But it doesn't really, for me, it doesn't really affect songwriting at all. And that's where I'm at now. It's like, I'm not bothered about being virtuoso. I don't practice much or anything like that. I'm just about playing within my capabilities, keeping up a good standard, obviously, because I want to be able to do what I want to do. But the main thing is about the songwriting, you know? So you don't need to be classically trained to write a good song. If anything, maybe arguably you say it could hinder you at some point.
What were these hearing difficulties that you had?
I mean, it's, you know, it was to do with the tubes that go to the eardrum, apparently. And so I think it was pretty much just that the tubes that go up there and carry sound. I mean, I know nothing about the actual biology behind it, something along these lines. They were just basically too small and restricted. It also led me to have like quite a rare form of tinnitus, which isn't the hum, that most people get that have tinnitus, but rather a clicking. So, you can that clicking that you get when your ears pop and you're on a flight, or something like that. That's basically what it's like. And I've had that since forever. Now I don't even really hear it at all because my brain's, I suppose, like cancelled it out, But yeah, now my hearing's like not 100%, but it's fine, I can hear enough, but I'm probably doing it no favors standing in a room, blasting away for hours on end. But
do you use like pro earplugs and stuff like that when you're rehearsing or when you're on stage?
Not really. I mean, I 50% of the time I do, and Akercocke recently invested in some really decent ones, and I think each of us managed to keep them for nearly a year, but then obviously they just go missing. So I 50% of the time I have hearing protection in, which I need to make sure that I do it a bit more probably, because there is, something to be said that it takes something away from the feeling, for me. I think if we were playing a lot more and touring a lot more with the bands, then it would be an absolute necessity. But because it's relatively, occasional or split up, I pretty much don't play live shows with hearing protection in, because I just can't. I can't get into it as much, So rehearsal-wise, though, I should really make more effort just to stick in the earplugs because, Christ, I mean, that's loud. It's a small room we play in. That's different. You know what I mean? So,
but you do kind of want that feeling, though, and I would imagine it's to a lesser degree, but even when you're rehearsing, you still want that. You still want that kick, that rush.
Yeah, and we're all, where we're at is like the reason why we go down to the studio, which is it's not an easy thing to do when you've had like a long working week or whatever. The reason why we do it is because we need that outlet. There's a cathartic element to it, and obviously meeting up with your, friends and being creative. It's just basically an absolute necessity for, having a life worth living, and helps towards the overall health. And it's almost like if you're going to have, a drink, have a double whiskey or whatever, don't have a single. It's kind of, but then you've got to be careful, I suppose, otherwise you end up being an alcoholic.
So how much of a contribution do you make from a writing perspective at the moment to the different bands that you're in?
So obviously with Voices, Antichrist, and Shrines, right in there, with Antichrist, I suppose it's a little less, and I'm actually very happy about that, because there's only so much kind of creative input I can muster, particularly if there's like a few albums that are converging, which they are at the moment, actually. So basically, I just wait until I get, blueprint songs from Dave and Matt and Sam, and then I just put my things on top, and that's like it's a different way to work. It's, I suppose, not easier, but like fresher, perhaps a bit more spontaneous, a bit less long-winded. But with the other bands, it's pretty methodical. There's a lot of work that goes into it. And with Voices, I contribute a hell of a lot, as I do with Shrines. And then with Akercocke, Jason, because he has a fantastic ear for it, has always done the keyboard programming. I think at some point maybe Martin Bonsoir as well. It's a big thing that he, I think, brought in to Akercocke as he was the kind of instigator with that. I mean, I might be wrong about this, but he's got a long history with electronic music, and was actually put out stuff which you'd have to research to find it. But he's got that thing. And in terms of where I come in now, I've started to kind of do my own interpretations of what he programmed on the record live, adding my bits of extra dynamics, should we say, here and there. It's small, but it's there. And now that we're, obviously creating another record, it's happening. I think I am going to, be contributing towards actually bringing some music to the table for this one. Again, I think it's one of those things that if I bring it to the table and it works, then it's going to be in there, But I'm not precious about these things. If, say, Jason or whoever thinks, it's a bit too much, or perhaps we can do something different, I'm not the sort of person, particularly with Akercocke, that's going to be like, well, I want my riff in, or I want my bit in, It's not.
Or
it's
I'm
not
out.
It's not that dynamic,
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that throughout what is already becoming a very interesting creative process for album number 7, I think it is 6 or 7. I'm going to bring in some keyboards, or piano, or even just some sound design, maybe, So I feel like that's a little bit further down the line, though, than where they're at, which is figuring out the blueprints of the song, So yeah, that's where we're at. So just stay tuned, and that's where you'll see it.
Side note, by the way, has Matt played you any? I thought about this because you mentioned kind of creativity and the speed of creativity. Has Matt played you any of that project that he's done with Sam, Werewolves?
Well, Werewolves, yeah. Well, I've heard what's online, and I think Dave has a copy of the record that they've done, and he put it on, on his phone or whatever. And I was like, what's going on here? Like, why hasn't Matt, sent it to me yet, kind of thing, But I've heard some of it. Yeah, it's brutal.
I can't get my head around how, just to fuck around, in 4 weeks he's written a better death metal album than 95% of death metal that's come out this year. So.
I mean, Matt's an amazingly, obviously capable guitar player. His actual playing is just like, inhuman, as is David's, but Matt is just a machine. He just literally, I reckon if someone said, here's $5,000, go into a studio for a week and create another record, it just, even after this project he's just done writing, and he's just written a new Antichrist record, or at least it's getting there, he just do it again. He can just riff and riff and riff. And the thing is that 99% of it is gold. So yeah, he's a machine. He's a death metal brutal Australian madman.
I had a long chat with Jason over many glasses of wine once, and he said to me, Matt was probably the best guitarist he's ever seen. He says the guy is on a level that is just ridiculous.
And he's got, ever since he's been with, he was obviously amazing in Akercocke, but since then, he's really basically concentrated on a lot of different styles, as far as I can tell, and branched out more. So basically, he's like even way better than he was when he was with Akercocke.
And you can hear that on particularly on the last Antichrist Imperium album, because there's like rock bits that come in. There's like a guitar solo that it sounds like it wouldn't be entirely out of place on a Dire Straits album, and yet it fits into the overall sound perfectly. So
he loves Guns N' Roses, that guy.
Yeah. So how far down the track are you guys with all of the stuff? So you're saying everything is converging at once now. So Akercocke,
a bit, Voices. I'm sure it will be all right, But the truth of it is that there's a Voices record that's going to be being made very soon. Akercocke are way down the line of producing a whole wealth of material for the next one. As far as I'm aware, the Antichrist record's mostly complete in terms of songs, that need to be then worked out between us all. And Shrines are about to release an EP which is finished and mastered. That's going to be released soon. How and when and why, not why, but how and when and what and whatever is yet to be confirmed. But we've got some, very trusted people that we work with. So, yeah, there's going to be a lot, man. There's going to be a lot coming out within probably the next year, I would say.
Yeah. So you're going to be a very busy man in the next year.
Always, man.
And
You know,
I was just about to say, I mean, you're doing all of the stuff and you have a full-time job. I mean, where do you find the time to fit everything in?
part time. Yeah. I do part time work.
Yeah.
You know, and luckily I've just managed to get a new job, which is really beneficial to my practice as a musician, in the sense that it doesn't take up too much of my time. You know, obviously I live in London. We all know it's crazy expensive and difficult in so many ways. So I need to work, unfortunately. But yeah, actually, as I say, I've been there's been a fairly lucky turn, and yeah, you know, there's just about enough time to fit everything in. Is the answer, you know. So fingers crossed that remains the same, and you know, because otherwise, it's just these things. The way I see them, man, is that music is the priority, and all this other stuff, you know, is just the hurdles. You know, they're certainly not things that stop it. You know, unless something really significant happens or whatever. In terms of your life set up, but they're just hurdles, you know. And even if I'm particularly, you know, overworked or whatever, so be it for a period of time, because I also get the luxury of having breaks away and playing shows and all this kind of stuff on the back end of producing records, which gives me a lot of pleasure and downtime, and you know, so you can't not put in that hard work to then, you know, expect that you're going to have all that awesome stuff, you know. So I'm up for it, man. That's what I'm saying. It's going to be a busy time, though, definitely.
And what's, you know, if you think kind of 5-10 years, you know, maybe even a little longer down the line, what is that ultimate goal for you as a musician and as an artist?
I try and manage expectations at all times. I think my ultimate goal is just a simple one, which is to be as prolific as possible, put out some of my own music, which is yet to see the light of day, as I before mentioned. And then in terms of just more prosaically, it would be great to be able to just live off the music. And I live modestly as much as I can. You know, to be able to just make ends meet through creativity and doing what I'm basically put on planet Earth to do, which is create music and giving that out to people that are willing to listen to it. And every time somebody even bothers to pick up, you know, an old record or a new one or a T-shirt, or whatever, I just think, you know, I'm genuinely humbled by that, and it's an awesome thing, you know. So hopefully, if I can take that to a level where it's, you know, giving me what I need to just live a basic life, you know, and not have to spend half of the week working, then that's the ultimate goal. But obviously, on the other side of it, I want to be a multimillionaire and live like Motley Crue. You know, that's all the stuff I just said there is bullshit. You know, in reality, that's what
Once you can start scoring films for PTA, then, you know, who knows?
Yeah, you know, and until that there is a Netflix sort of semi-autobiographical stylized film about my life in Peckham, then I'm not gonna be happy.
On the mean streets of Peckham. Yeah, I have to say, I think. I mean, I live on the outskirts of London now. I'm getting to the point where I suspect I'll probably be moving out Berkshire way.
Oh right, soon. Yeah.
It's
nice out there, man. You know.
Yeah,
nice.
I reckon less than a year. London is too overcrowded for me.
It is brutal. Yeah, and I go into town where I work. You know, so I'm fully aware of that. But you know, there is an upside to it in a way, if you like. The record London by Voices, which I still kind of probably, if I'm, you know, put my hands up and say I think that that's the zenith of creativity that we've managed to achieve thus far. Were it not for that challenge that London presents and that kind of like tension, you know, then that work wouldn't exist. You know, so Christ, we suffer for it, but you know, at least we got this great record out of it in the end. But at some point, I do, like yourself, you know, I want to move out of the UK. Really, you know.
Where would you move to?
Europe is more my vibe, and I'm lucky enough to say that the best gift that my grandparents could have ever given me is that they are Irish. So I get the passport, So it's certainly not happening anytime right now. But I do love particularly the south of France. I feel more at home there. I mean, I've just recently holidayed in Czech Republic, and actually I was like straight away, it's like this is just so much more, in tune with basically what I think you can deal with to be a creative individual. Because ultimately, London, the propaganda behind being in London and being a musician and making a success out of it, it's exactly that. It's just propaganda. Right? London becomes a huge opposition to being a prolific musician, because like basically most people have to work like 5, if not 6 days out of the week. How are you going to do that and then also be in a band and produce? So yeah, London is it's a love-hate thing, man.
Yeah,
love-hate thing.
I described London to someone that way once, and I was paraphrasing something I heard Martin Scorsese say in an interview about New York. Because when it comes to London, I love and hate it in equal measure. I have seen so many cool things here. I've been to so many great shows. I've been to the food scene here is great. I fucking love the stand-up comedy scene here. So I go to the comedy stores as frequently as I can. But at the same time, there are too many people here. I generally dislike most of the people that I am surrounded by on the trains. Fortunately, I do a job where I don't have to travel. I don't have to go into the office all the time, so I can work from home quite a lot.
Oh yeah,
and that helps. But honestly, I think if that were not the case, and it were not for black metal, I'm not sure I would go.
Yeah, sure thing, man. Well, I'm glad to hear you don't have to deal with that too often, because that it drags you down. If I can just about manage it with the level that I go into town.
Yeah.
Any more, if the idea of having to do it 5 or 6 days a week is just like I just would not.
That theme that you guys, I mean, I always thought the London record really captured that essence and that feeling of London absolutely perfectly. I mean, especially like, if I think back to my days of working in the city, those late nights coming back from the strip club in the taxi.
I wouldn't know anything about
that sense that you get from London when it's 3 a.m. and all these kind of seedy characters are floating around. I thought that album just absolutely nailed that atmosphere so perfectly. Is that kind of a theme that you guys would ever consider kind of carrying on? Because it's almost in a way, it's like the Abigail character on the King Diamond album. London was almost a character on the record.
Sure. Well, obviously, one of the things that people really latched onto with London was that narrative, and that's we wrote it in a kind of visual way, and it was very much written in a kind of improvisational way. It was like a film unfolding before our eyes as each riff got made within the rehearsal space, and as I said to you before, I do kind of attribute that record as being, and I don't want to speak too soon, but like it is a kind of zenith of our creativity between myself, David, and Pete, and then Dan certainly, but his role came on more of a production element. Of course, he wrote some great bass parts as well, but where his element is the production, without which we would have nothing. Anyway, I don't think that there's going to be any form of continuation of that London narrative concept, whatever you want to call it, right? However, what we have kind of bubbling up at the moment in the new material that is surfacing, I would say that it sounds a bit like it's a synergy between London and Frightened. I'm very excited about that fact. So I suppose with my mind's eye, as and when and if this record gets made and put out there, people are going to hear that it is a bit more extreme again, and it is a bit darker. It's a bit more, it's got a real edge to it. And Frightened, I listen to that record and I can just get into it, and that's rare, so I love it to bits. It's my favorite, However, what we as individuals definitely need to do from time to time is to express some sort of, horrific things, and I think that's creeping its way back in to this, what is going to be, Voices number 4. Fingers crossed it happens, because the band's very haphazard, Akercocke is very kind of, it's a pretty well-oiled machine, and everyone's in their good zone and all this kind of stuff, and it's really positive and all this shit. Voices is more like, who knows what the fuck's going to happen at any one moment between us as individuals, between us creatively, and there's a real tension there, which makes it hard, but then also extremely rewarding when something comes out the back end. Yeah.
I was wondering when I heard Frightened for the first time, and I did really enjoy the album as well.
Thank you.
But that kind of softening, the thought crossed my mind, and you can kind of tell me your thoughts or correct me if I'm wrong here, because there's so much overlap between the songwriters on the Antichrist Imperium and Voices.
Yeah.
I wondered whether or not, either intentionally or unintentionally, you guys hadn't kind of reserved the more extreme stuff for Antichrist Imperium, because Antichrist Imperium is not a typical death metal band in any case.
No.
That's just kind of all over the place, and better off for it in my view. And then kind of kept the more somber, slower, more melodic stuff for Voices.
Well, to be honest with you, they're not related at all, because obviously Matt is, had never had anything to do with Voices, and they're two sort of completely separate entities. I think that when I listened to the last Antichrist record, there was probably a little bit of overlap with my own vocal style, because they were recorded relatively similar kind of times, and I was like madly into Brian Ferry, and which I still am now, and obviously Scott, and so to me, like, that's the only real kind of crossover or similarities, but there was no like dishing out of material between those two bands, because they're simply completely unrelated, but ultimately there is going to be a little bit of similarities, because the people say this about Akercocke versus Voices and that, and they're like, oh, is it Voices are just like another Akercocke? It's like, well, no is the answer, but obviously we are who we are, and we play in the ways that we play, so they're going to sound a bit alike, That, David's vast drum ability, is going to manifest in that same way that it does on an Ak record to Voices to Antichrist, and that's the same with all of us creatively, But obviously the bands have their own sort of life and potential sort of, not bracket that they're trying to fit into, but like their own sound, Yeah. I think like arguably like Voices is a bit more punk, a bit more, sort of post-punky meets black metal. I mean, I feel like the ultimate goal for me, and that's why I think Frightened's still my favourite record of from the three, is that the idea of having something that's like Joy Division but black metal. That's all I want to hear. That's music that I want to hear. I don't care whether anyone else, is interested. So yeah, long may it last, man.
Yeah, and just side note, whenever anybody ever asks me to describe Akercocke, I'd say, especially for the earlier stuff like Corenson, it's like Emperor were recording in the Nightside Eclipse. Frank Mullen came over to do vocals, and then they all started listening to a shitload of Killing Joke while it was happening. That sounds
great.
Yeah, that's basically
that sounds great, man.
But dude, I'm going to ask you one more question. I'm going to let you go. Have you ever seen There Will Be Blood with the orchestra?
No, but I did see Phantom Thread with the orchestra.
Oh, you should. Yeah, I didn't see. I love that movie and I love that soundtrack. Amazing. The only one I've seen with the orchestra was Aliens.
Oh yeah,
which
they
was
did. They did. There will be blood, didn't they?
yeah.
And I should have gone. I seem to remember off the top of my head it clashed with touring. Otherwise, I would have been there.
Yeah.
Wasn't it at the Roundhouse? I think
Yeah, yeah.
maybe.
Well, if they ever do
Um,
it at Royal Albert Hall, no
we'll
matter what
go.
happens, you
We'll
and I are
go,
definitely
man.
going. Without,
Yeah, and we'll dress up like Daniel Plainview, man.
well,
Yeah.
that's how my character on Red Dead Redemption is dressed as well. So.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I'll grow my moustache in preparation.
Awesome, dude. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being on the show.
Nice one. I enjoyed that, mate. And I'll see you at a show soon, no doubt.
You most certainly will do. Once again to Sam Loynes for joining me for that really fun chat. A first for him on Into the Necrosphere, and hopefully not the last appearance that he'll be making on the show. And like I said earlier on during the intro, if you haven't checked out Akercocke, the Antichrist Imperium, Voices, Shrines, you really owe it to yourself to do so. I mean, and Akercocke, I've made no secret of the fact that they're one of my favorite bands. The Antichrist Imperium is right up there. Voices are absolutely stunning. And Shrines are an absolute monster as well. So, great to talk to somebody that is so versatile and multi-talented. And speaking of talent, it is time for another edition of What I'm Cranking this week. And the first pick this week is going to be a band called Gatecreeper. They have just brought out their second album on Relapse Records. It's called Deserted. And before I start the review, I want to just mention something. I get the impression from some of the feedback I've had that a few folks feel that I am very much aligned to black metal, and I'm very biased to black metal, I should say, and that I'm not a big fan of death metal, at least not anything new. I would say that is maybe 25% true. I think as far as black metal is concerned, I think a lot of the newer bands coming out in the scene are a lot more exciting to me than what's coming out in death metal, and that's just me being honest. But that being said, I mean, I still love death metal. I think the genre turned a bit of a corner after, a real kind of lull in the mid noughties when, it all just seemed to be about who can play the fastest and who can play the most technical. Some of that stuff has a place, but generally it's not really the sort of thing that I'm interested in listening to. I will, however, say that Gatecreeper is an exception. So, as I said, Deserted is their second album. It is available on Relapse Records. It's the follow-up to a record that came out in, I think, 2015 called The Sonoron Deprivation. And these guys, basically, if you hear their music for the first time, I mean, they, in my view, can be described as the power trip of death metal, in that they unashamedly embrace their influences and their inspirations. So as you work your way across the record, you are going to hear pretty strong hints towards things like Left Hand Path by Entombed, Dismembers like an Ever-Flowing Stream. They actually have it kind of the Swedish death metal vibe down pat, all the way to the Sunlight Studios type production that they have. So kind of that kind of really sort of beefed up buzzsaw type guitar, the almost kind of dry, crisp sound that a lot of those records had. Now, having said all of that, it might sound like I'm going to say, oh, well, it's just another, throwaway Swedish death metal clone. It is not. What Gatecreeper have done is they've taken an idea that is very well worn by this point, because I think Left Hand Path came out in 1990, which is fucking ages ago. And they have expertly executed that idea in a way that doesn't necessarily break down any barriers or take the genre huge steps forward, but I don't really think that's what they're going for. I think they're going for exactly what they achieved, which is really tightly performed, well-written, varied, hook-laden death metal songs. And yeah, they do it really, really well. I think that this is one of those records where the focus on the songwriting is such that you really do remember quite a lot of the tracks after the album is over. And circling back to what I said before about technical death metal in the 2000s, that was really one of my biggest beefs with it. A record would kind of whir by, and when it was done, you might have enjoyed it, but you'd be hard pressed to remember anything on there. With Gatecreeper, it was the case on their first album. It is definitely the case on their second album. There are a ton of memorable tracks, and I've not seen these guys live yet, but I can just imagine how well some of these songs would go over on stage. Specifically, the one that I'm going to play off the album. So this is my favorite track off of Deserted. It is a song called From the Ashes. That was From the Ashes by Gatecreeper off their new album Deserted. I will post the link to it in the description of this video, so if you like it, check it out. You will definitely want to check out the next band that I'm going to talk about, Panzerfaust, out of Ontario, Canada. They have been around for about 15 years. They are quite well known, or they gained a level of notoriety for a little stunt they pulled in 2014 where they showed up on the front lawn of the Westboro Baptist Church and relieved themselves. But their music is deadly serious. And they brought out their last full length in 2013. They brought out a really cool EP in 2016 called The Lucifer Principle. And now in 2019, they have given us what is being billed as an album, although I think by the length of it may potentially be an EP, but it doesn't really matter. The title is a fucking mouthful. Chapter 1, Sons of Perdition, Sons of Perdition, Chapter 1, War, Horrid War. As the title suggests, they explore lyrically, themes of historic as well as kind of present day armed conflict, and they do it in a very similar style to what Anel Nathrak did on their last album, which is to kind of just, I think, present you with the starkness and the ugliness of the subject matter, and then have the music follow suit and really reflect that. And the music is just absolutely exceptional. These guys are melodic, dynamic. Every single song is exceptionally well crafted and put together. The vocals are varied, aggressive, emotional. And then the final track, an 18-minute number that really kind of closes everything. Just sort of crowns everything and leaves you wanting more. So for me, this is absolutely spectacular. If you watch the interview that I did with the Orsifer, I actually had one of the songs off this album on there as a musical interlude, just about 30 seconds of it. I will now play another song off that album. This is called The Day After Trinity. That was The Day After Trinity by Panzerfaust, off the record Sons of Perdition, War, Horrid War, available on Eisenwald, and you can check them out on Bandcamp, Facebook. I will put a link in the description of this video, or if you are listening to this on iTunes or Stitcher, then use your little fingers and find them on Google yourself. But whatever you do, check out that record because you will not be disappointed. Another record that you will not be disappointed in is Celestial Mechanics, by my third and final pick this week. The band is called Tronos, and it is a collaboration featuring Shane Embry of Napalm Death and Russ Russell, who is a producer on a great many Napalm Death albums. And fun fact, also vocaled on a record called Embedded by a experimental industrial death-ish band called Me Took Seed. I love that Embedded album, and I think, much like Tronos, it was fairly criminally overlooked when it came out. I actually still listen to it fairly frequently. So when I heard that these guys were getting together to make a record, I was super excited to hear what it was going to sound like. Now, it is not Me Took Seed, but it is rather, it's kind of a celebration of a lot of the bands that I know Shane Embry really likes and will frequently cite as influences in interviews and influences on Napalm Death's music, but I think it has kind of influenced his riff style and his writing style generally. So the bands I'm referring to are bands like Voivod, Swans, Killing Joke, all sort of held together by the signature Shane Embry style, which you will know and instantly recognize if you listen to Napalm Death. But that year takes a slightly softer, more progressive, rockier tone. And I mean, just is fantastically good. I think if nothing else, Tronos is a testament to the fact, and I have said this to many people in the past, that Shane Embry, in my opinion, is one of the most underappreciated songwriters in metal. Maybe one of the most underrated songwriters or underappreciated songwriters in music generally. What this guy is capable of doing consistently. So, making one fantastic Napalm Death album after the next. Churning out phenomenal lockup records, doing a great job with Brugeria, and God knows what else he's got his fingers stuck into. The fact that he can then lend his hand to a record like this, and it turn out as great as it has, I think really means that, the world, the music media, everybody needs to show Shane a little bit of love. And I'm going to do just that right now. This is off Celestial Mechanics by Tronos. The song is called Walk Among the Dead Things.
We will burn in the fire.
That was Walk Among the Dead Things by Tronos. It is off a record called Celestial Mechanics. It is available on Century Media, and it carries the Jackie Schmidt Into the Necrosphere seal of approval. And that is basically it for the show. Coming up next week is part one of an absolutely epic conversation that I recorded with Jeremy Wagner of Broken Hope. I've decided I'm going to split it into two parts, because for about the first hour, we were talking about basically just everything that's going on with Broken Hope, with his various writing projects. Went down a couple of rabbit holes there, and then we went down not just a rabbit hole, a fucking wormhole, talking about horror movies. And that turned into about a 2-hour plus conversation. So given that Halloween is on its way, what I've decided I'm going to do is I will have kind of a business as usual interview with Jeremy on the show next week. And then the week after will be part 2 of my conversation with him, my countdown of the top 10 horror movies of all time. And trust me, you are definitely going to want to check that out. It was one of the most fun conversations I think I've had. Definitely on this show, certainly in all of the time that I've been writing about music, or that I've been interviewing people in bands. So that will be coming your way in 2 weeks' time, and then part 1 will be up next Tuesday. So check that out. In the meantime, have yourself a fucking awesome week. From the mean streets of Surbiton on the outskirts of London, I am signing off. Goodbye.